Transforming Workplace Culture, a conversation with attorney Brian Gottheil. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent. Hey everyone, this is attorney Mac Pillowy, lawyer, mediator, arbitrator from Houston, Texas, and from Florida. And now I'm in Toronto with my colleague, Thomas Giglione, and attorney Brian Gottheil. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Great. A little bit cold. It's about 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. So we're here in Harborfront with a nice backdrop here with the CN Tower.
Yep. And Brian, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Yes, awesome. All right, guys. So as you guys all know, we've been doing LMI podcast on the road. We were recently in Paris and Angers, France. And so now we are in Toronto and we were talking workplace culture. We're talking about training staff and dealing with employment law. And so we have today Brian Gottheil. And Brian, you're here to talk to us, educate the public a little bit more about what you do, your firm, and we got some questions for you. And so Thomas, before we get there, actually, let's talk a little bit about both of you gentlemen. As everyone knows, Thomas, you've been on the podcast as a co-host for years, and it's our first time actually meeting you in person. And
After
so
5 years, yes.
Yes,
Wow.
and so it's awesome to finally touch Thomas in the flesh, so to speak. Because we've been doing this on video for so long remotely from Vietnam, from Canada. And so now we're all here in Canada together. And so Thomas, it's very good to see you.
Good to see you, Mac. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And Brian Gottheil here, who specializes in workplace investigations and training. And I really like the training part. I prepared some questions focusing on your specialty. And welcome, Brian. If you could maybe introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, thank you very much. So yes, I'm Brian Gottheil. I work with a firm called Bernardi Human Resource Law that's based in the Greater Toronto area here. And we are among the leaders in the province of Ontario in workplace harassment investigations. That's one of the biggest things we do, but we also have a traditional employment law practice representing both employers and employees. And my title is actually Director of Training. And so in addition to doing the investigations, which I've done for years, I lead the part of our business that does anti-harassment respect EDI training, as well as training for HR folks on how to do the investigations and on other HR and legal topics. I guess that's the overview.
Wow,
Awesome.
That's great.
Yeah, Thomas, take it away.
Okay, so we have some questions for you, Brian. Well, one of them I like to start off with is you went from practicing law to doing transformation work for HR and such. Leaving a legal career is no small decision. What was the moment that the single event that made you realize that you needed to move from being an employment lawyer to leading workplace transformation? And looking back, do you think lawyers actually make better workplace investigators, or does the legal mindset sometimes get in the way of what you're doing?
It's hard to say a single moment because I feel like this was months and years of agonizing and of transitioning, but so I had been moving gradually from the employment law practice to the investigations practice, and I was also a non-equity partner and being considered for equity partner. And it was in that era that I was thinking, what I really love and what I'm really passionate about is the proactive stuff, is not just responding after somebody's already in legal trouble, but trying to improve workplace cultures a little more proactively, which is the training, which is the culture assessments. And that if I could somehow be a partner, but who only focused on that I might be happier. And the role I'm in is a non-partnership role, but I was able to work out, and our founder, Lauren Bernardi, actually proposed this role for me, and I was very happy to have it. And it was many months of going back and forth and thinking, man, I'm almost losing a part of my identity by giving up the legal practice, but I decided it was worth it, and it was really where I wanted to focus my time on. And to the second part of your question, I do think lawyers make good investigators. There's a lot of skills. When it comes to assessing evidence, When it comes to procedural fairness or due process, which people from other professions who come into it obviously can learn, and I teach them, but that lawyers is really foundational part of our training that makes it really helpful. But I do think that lawyers can't fall into the trap of just thinking that because they're a lawyer, they can automatically go and do it, that there's lots of both substance and process that you also have to learn.
Great. I'd like to go to the next topic about investigating the investigators. Most HR teams believe they're handling investigations the right way, but you've seen otherwise. Yeah. What's the most dangerous assumption HR teams make when investigating workplace disputes? And what's a real-world example, keeping in mind privacy, where an internal investigation went horribly wrong?
So I think the biggest mistake that is made is assuming that we already know the answer and going in trying to gather evidence to prove something we think that we already know, as opposed to really trying to approach it more independently, even if you are internal HR, and follow where the evidence takes you. An example, and I can give an example that's actually from real, reported case law, so that it's not, it's not confidential. It's an example that we use in our training on this topic, where we have people spot the flaws in this investigation, and basically everything that happened was a flaw. It involved a home hardware store out in Alberta, Western Canada, and basically they thought that they knew that this guy had engaged in sexual harassment, and they did an investigation that was entirely designed to extract a confession from him and not to actually find the truth. And I can go on and on about what went horribly wrong, but the bottom line was there was a large damage award, at least by Canadian standards, probably not a large damage award by American standards, because those things are different here. And to this day, it's an example that we continue to use. One of the things that
as a precedent, right?
Yeah, just as a precedent of what not to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And part of my tearing up here, it's not that the information is so emotional. It's just that it's so cold. So when we say, by American standards, one of the things is that weather guys is so different. Oh my goodness. All right. So let's talk about the hidden risks in workplace investigations. Most companies assume that simply conducting an investigation protects them from lawsuits, but you've seen cases where the investigation itself becomes the legal liability. What's the most overlooked mistake that turns an investigation into a ticking time bomb for a company?
So procedural fairness, again, if we want to rely on the results of an investigation to support some other decision we're making, if that's a discipline or a termination for cause, first of all, we need to give that procedural fairness to the respondent, the person who's been accused. And so making sure that they know what they've been accused of, which wasn't done in that case I was referencing. He was told, you know what you did. Know what they're accused of, have a fair opportunity to respond. The other thing, and I'll say, and this may, I suspect this will apply for the American audience too, but I can speak most directly for Canadians. What a lot of Canadian HR don't realize is that the investigation report or the investigation results itself are not evidence in an arbitration or in a court of the underlying case of what happened. And I think one of the mistakes that gets made is assuming that, we have this investigation report that says the person engaged in sexual harassment, so we can prove he engaged in sexual harassment. What that report does is allows you, first of all, to show you've done your due diligence, to show that as an employer you've taken things seriously, and that helps protect you from liability. But you have to be aware that at an actual arbitration hearing, you're still going to have to call those witnesses, and the arbitrator's going to make their own decision based on that.
Great. I'd like to go to the next topic. Obviously, Brian, you're involved in creating transformation and changing the culture in a company for the better. We're talking about creating a culture of trust, which is important in investigations. Employees fear retaliation when they file complaints, so they stay silent. HR wants to protect employees, but they also have to protect the company. How can leaders walk this tightrope between transparency and legal protection? And what's one example where a company got it right?
My answer to the walking the tightrope is I want to see this not as a contradiction, honestly. That protecting employees from retaliation and reprisal, protecting employees from harassment, from discrimination, is the win-win, and there shouldn't be a tension between helping the employees and helping the company. We have more productivity, we have less turnover, and turnover is extremely expensive if we have a respectful workplace. And so HR should be supporting both. And that would really be my message to operations and to leadership is nobody should be untouchable. If there's someone who, you feel, well, they're so important to the business or they're bringing in this money, the amount that you're losing by not having the respectful workplace in place is going to cost you 5 times that. And so, yes, people are afraid of retaliation, and HR really has to be active and vocal that how people are protected, having the conversations to reassure people. One example that I think is getting it right, and I have to be a little cautious because this is an active case. Yes. But I just had a call on Friday with an HR person in Florida who has a Canadian subsidiary here and knows that people are hesitant to participate in an investigation, and said, I'm actually going to fly to Toronto to first of all, I'm going to talk to the leaders of the union to give them my personal reassurance that people will be protected. And I'm actually going to fly to Toronto because this is that important. And I'm not saying you have to take an international flight every time.
But it's being proactive.
But it's being proactive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mac.
Awesome. So let's talk about handling high stakes workplace complaints. So tell us about the most intense workplace investigation that you handled. What was at stake? What went wrong, and what did it teach you about how to handle high stakes complaints in the right way?
Yeah, I think I had an investigation that involved just a very senior leader within the organization, and that's one of the things that makes things high stakes. One of the things that goes wrong is just things being too slow and taking too long, because this is people's lives, right? And sadly, one of the things that got in the way of that one was the pandemic, and it delayed things. And one of the employees ended up resigning. I was very sad about that because we ended up finding in her favor. I also don't want to make it sound like we're always finding in the complainant's favor because I would say it's probably closer to 50-50. Sometimes the person's done it, sometimes they haven't done it, and we really are neutral. But that was a case where the person had been harassed but ended up leaving before the investigation was complete, and I was sad about that. I think that's
real transformation, really, right?
Yeah.
The next topic I'd like to go to is workplace investigations and documentation, which is very important. The importance of incident documentation. I personally created a free employer incident report for HR teams to download at my website, We Agree Mediators. But tools are the only good as the people using them. What's the biggest mistake HR leaders make when documenting workplace incidents, and how can they avoid turning their own documentation into a liability?
I think just being cautious generally of what you write probably would have to be disclosed if there ever were a legal proceeding, and not putting something down that you would be embarrassed to have there. But also making sure that any issues that come forward that you are addressing or dealing with. And so it might not be that everything has to be investigated. In fact, often it's better if it doesn't, but that you show that if an issue has been documented, here's what we did about it if we went a different route.
All right, so let's talk about beyond investigating. So most companies, they treat investigations like they're a case closed once the decision's been made. But you've seen firsthand what happens when deeper cultural issues go ignored. What's the most overlooked step that could prevent repeat incidents before they start?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. That's such an important question, because I do find that all too often it's like, great, we've done the investigation. Either hey, good news, there was no harassment, so we don't have to do anything, or good news, we fired the harasser and now the problem's solved. And either way, you're just setting yourself up for trouble in the future. So I think in either of those cases, it's looking at, so first of all, it's follow-up. It's, have things been going better since the investigations, and checking in with the employees, whether that's through surveys or through discussions with management. And it's really being on top of the cultural issues that might be there. And so I would consider things like one-on-one interviews for culture assessment, engagement surveys. I would also consider what are the broader impacts of if there was harassment that had happened. Often what you see is that employees have habits that they've used to cope with the harassment or to protect themselves. So they might not communicate as much. They might not work together as a team. They might try to hoard, the success or the merits or the praise. And so we have to see, even if the harasser is no longer in that environment, what we can do about it. And in the case where it's, well, good news, case closed and there was no harassment, there's still someone who felt like they were harassed. There's still some kind of conflict going on. And so maybe we're looking at mediation. This goes into some of what Tom does, but with conflict resolution and mediation. So, my single biggest thing is just follow up and diagnose, because that's going to guide what you do next. But do something.
Great. The next topic is quite controversial recently because of the political discourse south of the border here in the USA. This actually topic is a title of my blog post in my LinkedIn profile. DEI training, are we doing more harm than good? This, like I said, is becoming a little bit controversial, more in the United States than here. It's starting to become controversial here. Yeah, it's coming here too. You question whether companies have actually achieved DEI or if they're just checking the boxes. My own article, Rethinking Inclusion, argues that some traditional DEI training actually backfires. What's your take? Is DEI training unintentionally creating more problems? And what's a better way forward?
So the short answer is there is better ways, or there are better ways to do DEI training. I don't think the answer is stop doing it and throwing it out, because it's so important.
Yes.
And inclusion, I don't think ever goes out of style. We can always be more inclusive, whatever our political views. We all want teams that work better together, employees to feel like they belong in our organization because they're going to do better work and they're going to be happier, and work is where they spend 8 or 10 or 12 hours of their day. Mm-hmm. So how do we do it better? The EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission in the US, released this study back in 2016 where they had reviewed 30 years of DEI and other anti-harassment and sexual harassment training, and came up with the stark conclusion that the vast majority of it did not work. And for 30 years of research, that's a pretty damning conclusion.
Yes.
But what they said was that two areas that are promising for approaching this training, one is civility training, and so focusing on what all employees can do at any level to make a workplace just more inviting place and more civil to one another. And the other was bystander intervention training. So how can you be an ally? How can you intervene when discrimination or harassment is happening? And at Bernardi, we actually felt vindicated because we had been using a civility training approach for years, and we're integrating more and more bystander intervention when we read the study. So this was sort of like, oh yeah, the way we've been doing it is actually supported by the research, which is great. But what both of these approaches have in common is that instead of treating people like you're the perpetrator and you got to stop doing this bad stuff, both of these approaches treat people as someone who have a role to play to build a respectful workplace, and treats everybody as the ally, as someone who can be part of, the hero part of the solution. And that's one of the reasons why these approaches work better.
That's great, Brian, that you've enlightened us about that study. Could you provide us a link to that? Mac, you could add that link, because that's a very important study. Very few HR people know about it, and I think that's transformative in itself in looking at it, perhaps a different approach to DEI training and transforming the workplace.
I'll send you that.
We'll put it on the show notes, definitely on the blog post as well.
Great.
Yeah.
I'd like to continue with it. Go ahead.
Thomas, go ahead and close us out with the last question, and then I'll follow up.
Okay. I'd like to continue continue on with this similar topic. Most workplace training, which is your specialty, Brian. Yes. Most workplace training is passive, but role plays using corporate theater, corporate drama forces employees to step into the scene and confront real issues. What's an example of a moment during your role play sessions in your training where you saw a powerful breakthrough in someone's perspective? So training perceptions to transform into perspectives.
Yeah, thanks for the question, because we use a whole bunch of different approaches and different activities. We use case studies, we use group discussion, small and large group. We use role plays where they're appropriate, because people learn by doing and people learn by analyzing, right? People don't learn just by sitting and being talked to, which is another problem with most training. I remember one in particular where we had, and this isn't a role play example, but it is a group discussion example where we're talking about how the impact of behavior rather than the intention, because people really get caught up on, well, I didn't mean to hurt them, but we want to avoid that unintentional impact. And somebody in the group told this story about calling somebody a goof, and this blowing up, and this had this really horrific impact on this other person because of something in their past history, and saying, well, like, look, I can't be held responsible for, thinking that someone's going to respond to being called a goof. Like, at what point is this just crossed the line? And we had this whole discussion about it, and I said at one point, well, if they feel that strongly about it, should they have to show up to work and be called a goof? It was a big, actually a hormone. Yeah, I guess not. And maybe it's not my fault. It's not a question of blame. It's not a question of I shouldn't have called him that. It's that now that I know, we can be more respectful of each other.
Good point.
Okay. And let's talk about training that sticks. So you focus on interactive training that actually shifts behavior, not just theory. What's one company that's completely transformed its workplace culture after training and made it different from the same old boring PowerPoint seminars?
Yeah, so again, we don't do the same old boring PowerPoint seminars.
Good. I'm glad. Death by PowerPoint.
it's called Death by PowerPoint for a reason.
Yes.
And people, there's lots of education research. People just don't learn by being talked to.
Yes.
I've heard it said that nobody's ever learned anything from a clear explanation. So you have to be engaged in it. You have to do it. But it's really about what you can take with it and do with it afterwards. So I'm glad to be able to share this story of the operations manager of a client of ours took a training about transforming toxic teams, and he took a lot of notes and then went and just thought through, how am I going to apply this in my own company? He identified who he sort of colorfully called the toxic agents, but the employees who were creating toxicity for others, the people who were the bystanders, the allies, the people who were trying to keep quiet because they were afraid but maybe could become allies, and map this out. He met with his team of managers to run through this, and they put a plan in place, and it involved a combination of some training, some terminations that were necessary, some just more focus on culture change, and they really were able to turn things around.
That's great. Do you want to do that?
No, I think we can start wrapping up, but you can go ahead and take it.
Okay, well, I'll have one final question, Brian. Yeah. Feedback's very important. We're talking about making performance feedback work. Giving feedback shouldn't feel like walking on eggshells, but for many managers, it does. What's the number one mistake leaders make when delivering performance feedback? And how do you reframe these conversations to build trust instead of fear?
I think the number one mistake that managers make is waiting too long to do it, and probably because it feels uncomfortable and they're averse to conflict and it feels like walking on eggshells, like you said. And so they delay, and then once it gets so bad that they have to deal with it, they're already frustrated, and it's harder to address the behavior because the behavior's been going on for so long. So I think the biggest advice is get in early, and then it's a lot easier to do it in a very casual and very positive and forward-looking way. Like, hey, great work that you've done. Here's one thing that we need to improve. It can be as simple as that in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. But it's easier to do that if, first of all, if we have an established relationship with the employee and in which we're talking about how things are going, both positive and constructive on an ongoing basis. Mm-hmm. And then also if, the problem hasn't escalated by the time we've having the conversation.
Okay.
An analogous thing happens in our personal lives where, we let things build up, and then, we have that, we're afraid of having that difficult conversation. So the same thing applies in our personal lives.
Right. I mean, how many of you love the experience when a partner or a parent gets mad at you about something you did 6 months ago?
Yeah.
And we don't want that in workplaces either.
Yeah. All right. So, guys, we're going to start wrapping it up here. But Brian Gottheil, thank you so much for coming on the LMI podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you for being a guest on the LMI podcast on the road. And thank you, Thomas, for being a co-host again. We're going to continue this conversation with others as well in Toronto. And Brian, before we close out, let people know how they can get in contact with you, because there might be somebody watching that might want to follow up.
Yeah, thank you. hrlawyers.ca. So HR and lawyers is plural. .ca is our firm's website. That's probably the easiest way. You can also look me up on LinkedIn, Brian with an I, Gottheil, although I'm sure you'll put my name in the description.
Yes, sir.
It's .ca. We're in Canada, so don't put .com. And thanks for the opportunity, Mac and Brian. Thank you. Really interesting discussion. It's really a pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you very much.
All right, everybody. Check out LMIpodcast.com, and we're everywhere on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all that good stuff. All right. Take care, everybody. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.